I never thought a joyful party could turn into chaos. The room was full of laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses until everything changed in a second. Out of nowhere, my sister-in-law grabbed a heavy vase and smashed it hard against my daughter's head. Her screams tore through the air before I could reach her. My sister-in-law attacked again, this time with more violence. Hello, my name is Elena Carter, and I am 35 years old. If you had asked me a month ago what my life was like, I would have said it was normal but satisfactory. I work as a librarian at the Abinser Public Library, a place I've loved since I was a child. That's where I met my husband, Daniel, 13 years ago. My job doesn't pay much, but I love the feeling of handing a child their first book and seeing their eyes light up with curiosity. It makes everything worthwhile. On that particular May afternoon, the sun streamed through the huge windows of the children's section, bathing the shelves in a golden glow. The room smelled like a mixture of old and new paper with a light touch of the library's air freshener. Miss Elena, what book are you going to read to us now? A little voice asked. I smiled at the boy standing in front of me. I barely opened my mouth to answer when my cell phone vibrated on the desk. I looked at the screen. It was Daniel. I hesitated. He rarely called me during work. I'm sorry, little one, I need to take this call, I said softly before stepping away. As soon as I answered, Daniel's voice sounded tense. Elena, Mom wants us to meet at that place. I felt a knot in my stomach. That place meant Margaret's property on Willow Street, the huge Victorian mansion where my mother-in-law lived. Margaret Lancaster was a highly respected woman in Abinser society. Of course, she didn't approve of me as her son's wife. Okay, I said, exhaling slowly. I'll go after picking Mia up from school. I hung up the call, but the unease remained. For 13 years, Margaret had treated me like a stranger, always reminding me with her curt politeness that a librarian wasn't worthy of the Lancaster name. And worst of all, she treated Mia the same way. After work, I drove to Abinser High School to pick up my 12-year-old daughter. She was waiting at the school gate with her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her long brown hair was tied in a simple ponytail, and her face lit up when she saw me, until she noticed the expression on mine. Mom? She asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. What's wrong? I forced a small smile. Nothing, honey, we just have to make a quick stop before we go home. Mia fastened her seatbelt and hesitated. Your grandmother's house? The light disappeared from her face. She looked out the window, tightening the straps of her backpack. Oh, she murmured. I don't blame her for feeling uncomfortable. Margaret had never been warm to her. While most grandmothers showered their grandchildren with love, Margaret only showed Mia a cold indifference. She once told Daniel that Mia had been raised in the library, as if it were an insult. The drive to Willow Street passed in silence. The Lancaster estate was an imposing Victorian mansion with huge black iron gates that loomed against the evening light. A long driveway led to a house that seemed straight out of a history book, beautiful but intimidating. When we pulled up, I noticed a sleek black sports car already parked outside. Ashley's car. Ashley was Daniel's younger sister. She was 29 years old and practically a replica of Margaret, arrogant and always looking down on me. She worked in luxury real estate, which meant she spent most of her time showing off expensive brands and talking about her latest investments. Mia sighed. Aunt Ashley is here too. I squeezed her hand in support before getting out of the car. Let's just get this over with. The front door opened before I could knock. Ashley stood there with her arms crossed, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire monthly salary. Well, well, she said with amusement in her voice. You finally arrived. Inside, the mansion was as imposing as ever. Huge chandeliers, wide staircases, and furniture that seemed too expensive to touch. In the formal living room, Margaret sat with her impeccable posture, her presence as dominant as always. Beside her, Ryan Collins, Ashley's fiancé, a well-known corporate lawyer, seemed more serene than his future wife. But there was something in his gaze that felt uneasy. Then Margaret spoke, her tone sharp and curt. You're late. I took a deep breath, keeping my expression neutral. I was at work, I replied calmly. Margaret gave a barely perceptible smile, her sharp eyes analyzing us from head to toe as if preparing for what was to come. Ashley plopped down next to Ryan, tossing her designer bag onto the sofa with utter carelessness. Her expensive perfume filled the air as she ran her perfectly manicured nails across her phone screen. Margaret reached for a small velvet box on the coffee table and opened it with deliberate slowness. The moment she did, the room seemed to hold its breath. Inside the box was a stunning diamond and sapphire bracelet, an exquisite piece of glittering stones precisely arranged in an elegant yet imposing design. It shimmered under the chandelier light, casting reflections on the polished marble. "This," Margaret said softly, "is the Lancaster family heirloom, a bracelet that has been passed down through generations." I stared at it. The jewel was impressive, but beyond its beauty, it was worth a fortune. Ashley leaned forward with a smug smile. "It's valued at $200,000. Bracelet theft and false accusation. Rock City. 12-year-old girl framed and assaulted. Justice prevails." Those who had once admired Margaret and Ashley now distanced themselves. Margaret's power and influence had vanished. The Lancaster name, once synonymous with wealth and prestige, now represented fraud and disgrace. The day of the trial arrived. As I walked through the doors of the Abensor courthouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anxiety, determination. This was the final step. The large courtroom was packed. Reporters, Lancaster associates, spectators eager to see justice served. Margaret and Ashley sat at the defendant's table, their formerly arrogant expressions replaced by pure exhaustion. Ashley looked the worst. Her perfect facade had vanished, replaced by deep dark circles under her eyes and a trembling hand that nervously tapped the table. Margaret, on the other hand, remained eerily still, her fingers interlaced like a woman who had nothing left to say. I sat next to Daniel, who took my hand and squeezed it tightly. Mia's small fingers were trembling. "Are you okay, honey?" I whispered. She nodded, but I could tell she was nervous. This was the day she would finally get justice. The judge entered and the trial began. The prosecutor presented the evidence against Ashley with devastating detail. Security camera footage, witness statements, the fraudulent insurance claim. One by one, the facts came out, and each piece of evidence felt like another nail in Ashley's coffin. But the moment that shook the room more than anything was the video of her attacking Mia. As the recording began to play, gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Seeing an adult woman smash a vase over the head of a 12-year-old girl was sickening. Mia tensed beside me, lowering her head slightly. I wrapped my arm around her protectively. Ashley looked humiliated, staring fixedly at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. After that, the insurance investigator testified, explaining how Ashley had orchestrated the theft of the bracelet to collect the insurance money, a desperate move to cover the payments on her luxury condo. It was undeniable. She was guilty. The judge looked at her sternly. "Do you have anything to say before I hand down your sentence?" Ashley stood up abruptly, her face red with anger. "This isn't fair," she shouted. "I'm a Lancaster. I can't go to prison." The room fell completely silent. She still didn't understand. The judge looked unimpressed. "Miss Lancaster, your last name means nothing in this court. The only thing that matters here is the law, and you broke it." The verdict came swiftly. Ashley was sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $250,000, a large portion of which was earmarked to compensate Mia. Her assets were liquidated. Her condo seized, her designer clothes and luxury cars auctioned off, her bank accounts frozen, leaving her completely ruined. When the bailiffs approached her, Ashley's expression twisted in pure horror. "You can't do this," she screamed. "Mom, do something." Margaret didn't even look at her. Ashley's screams followed her as she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The air grew even colder as Margaret's trial began. Her crimes weren't limited to covering up Ashley's lies. She had years of financial fraud hidden under her name. The IRS investigator presented damning evidence. Documents that proved she had evaded taxes for over a decade, funneling money to offshore accounts and shell companies. Then came the testimony that sealed her fate. A former Lancaster family accountant, now turned key witness, testified under oath. Margaret Lancaster used her wealth to control everyone around her. She thought she was untouchable. But in the end, she destroyed her own empire. Margaret remained silent, expressionless. But I saw it, the slight tremor in her hands. Her hands trembled slightly and her jaw tightened. She was afraid. The judge turned to her. Margaret Lancaster, do you have any final words? For a moment I thought she might beg for mercy, but instead she lifted her chin proudly and said, I regret nothing. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge sighed and delivered the final verdict. Margaret was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her estate, including the Lancaster mansion, was seized, her bank accounts frozen, leaving her with nothing. Unlike Ashley, Margaret didn't scream. She simply stood, adjusted her coat, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. For the first time in her life, she had lost control. It was finally over. As we left the courthouse, Mia looked at me with large, hopeful eyes. Mom, is it really over? She asked softly. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. Yes, honey. It's over. Daniel let out a deep sigh and relaxed his shoulders, lighter than I'd ever seen him. No more Lancasters, he said. No more living in fear. I looked at my husband and my daughter, the people who truly mattered. We weren't just free from Margaret and Ashley. We were truly free. A month later, life was peaceful. Mia was happy. She smiled more, laughed more. Daniel had become the father Mia always needed. He spent time with her, protected her, and never hesitated to defend her. And I went back to my job at the Abencer Public Library, the place where I truly belonged. One quiet afternoon, I was shelving books when a group of children ran towards me. Miss Elena. I turned, smiling. What's up, little library mice? Mia was among them, beaming. Mom, can I do today's storytelling? I looked at her proudly, my brave and strong daughter, the girl who had faced so much and was still standing. Of course, honey, I said, stepping aside. Mia took a deep breath, turned to the children, and opened a book. Today's story is called The Truth Always Comes Out. As she began to read, sunlight streamed through the library's tall windows, bathing the room in a golden glow. The Lancaster name had fallen, but we had risen. And this was our happy ending.